There are all kinds of things that will make a character unlikable. While any novel will have its share of unlikable characters, you also need a few likable ones in there in order to draw the reader in. And it's those characters that you do not want to be sabotaged by unlikability. So today we're going to talk about 5 signs of an unlikable character that your reader would like if you would avoid. Speaking of things that you might like to do, consider subscribing to my channel if you find these videos something that is somewhat to your liking. Alright, first sign of an unlikable character that we're going to talk about today, having a character who is too likable. Okay. Anything attractive is polarizing on some level. Readers are not a monolith in their assessment of a character. Even the most likable character is going to have some segment of your readership who will dislike them. To have a character that 20% of readers really love likely means that 20% of readers will find that same character unlikable, and the remaining 60% might be apathetic or generally neutral towards the character. I don't know if those percentages are actually accurate, but the idea here is that the quirks and viewpoints and flaws and whatever else you have to bake into a character in order for some percentage of readers to like that character is probably exactly the same stuff that will make some people intensely dislike that character. Making a character that readers love is different from making one that no one will hate. When you dilute a character to the point where everyone will like them, or at least not hate them, you run the risk of simply making people feel apathetic about the character, which is not good. This is how you end up with bland, forgettable characters in your novel. Thing number 2 that can make a character unlikable, relying on the hero-villain axis to define their likability. People sometimes equate the heroic status of a character with their overall likability, and that's simply not true. You can have unlikable heroes and likable villains. Heroism and villainy will certainly affect likability, but the two are not tightly correlated. If you have a character like Count Olaf from the series of Unfortunate Events, or A Series of Unfortunate Events, whatever it's called, that's a generally unlikable character, but he's also a very likable villain in that he's an interesting villain, and he's a villain that the reader is generally interested in reading more about. There is more nuance to the issue of likability than simply whether a character is a hero or a villain. I think hero and villain map more closely onto who the reader wants to succeed versus fail. Usually they want heroes to succeed and villains to fail. The likability of a character has to do with how the reader feels when that character is on the page. Are they excited to read about this character? Do they find them deep and interesting? They may not rejoice in the character's success, but that's a different feeling than finding a character to be flat or one note or annoying or just not interesting. You can't expect the actions the character takes to naturally make that character likable. It will certainly help, but you need to go beyond that. A boring or egotistical hero pursuing the right things will not be enough to offset the unlikability built into the character. Making your character a hero is not enough to make them likable. Next up, having a character affect the plot or be affected by the plot instead of having them affect the plot and be affected by the plot. A character can either be buffeted by events of the story, carried along by the winds of the plot, or they can take actions that affect the plot, actions that change and shape the world around them. I would argue that in order to have a likable character, you need to have a combination of both. The character should neither just be a lump that is pushed around by the world around them, nor should they be an omnipotent force that can bend the world and other characters to their will. A character who lacks agency, who never takes actions that affect the plot, is generally going to be unlikable. Readers generally like to read about characters who are pursuing their goals and making progress and have motivations that they pursue. Now, there are stories out there that center around characters who, for whatever reason, lack agency to some degree and really don't participate in the story. But in those stories, the character's lack of agency is a central theme of the story. It's an intentional removal of character agency in order to tell a particular story. You see this in stories where a character is depressed or imprisoned or otherwise stripped of their agency. When a character unintentionally lacks agency, when you don't mean for them to be a character who doesn't have agency, that's when you run into problems. That's when the lack of agency can make a character more unlikable. At the same time, you don't want a character who is able to escape consequences or that seems to bend other characters to their will. This, I think, is ultimately the problem with Mary Sue / Gary Stu type characters. You have a character who can be an asshole and is still fawned over by all the other characters. You have a character who is immeasurably brilliant and never wrong about anything because the author really, really likes this character. That's fundamentally what you have when you have a Mary / Gary Sue / Stu situation. You have a character who is unrealistically affecting the world around them to a higher degree than would be expected. Sure, all of the other minions are knocked out after 2 kicks to the head, but our hero can take at least 3 dozen kicks to the head, a few swipes from a katana, and a bullet wound to the shoulder while still being able to crack wise with a lovely smirk across their perfectly shaped face. This is not good. These are characters who are not affected by the world, but do affect the world. Every character should be balanced between the effect they have on the world and the effect that the world has on them. It should be a circuit. It should be a relationship between the character and the world. Going too far in either direction can lead to an unlikable character. Next up in our unlikability list, excessive Magguffinication. This is a very specific example, but I've been thinking about MacGuffins lately for whatever reason, so I wanted to talk about it here. Now, a MacGuffin is basically an object that drives the plot through the character's desire to possess that object. The main idea of a MacGuffin is that you can switch out what this object is without really changing the plot. The plot is built around the pursuit of that object. The MacGuffin could be a key to a treasure chest, a map to a treasure chest, the codes to launch a nuclear missile, a map to a nuclear missile, an infinity stone, a magical amulet, the One Ring, whatever. A MacGuffin is about the pursuit of that MacGuffin, not the MacGuffin itself. Now, a MacGuffin is not a problematic plot device as long as you build an exciting story around the pursuit of that MacGuffin. There's a lot of great novels and a lot of great stories out there that center around the retrieval of a MacGuffin. They are not an inherently bad plot device on their own. Characters, though, can sometimes become MacGuffins, and this can cause problems with that character. When a story centers around trying to capture a princess or some kid with some kind of magical ability, the characters who have been MacGuffinified often suffer. If you write a helpless, one-note, constantly almost getting captured character who could be replaced with a briefcase just as easily, you're usually not adding anything to the story. It's like the character is basically an object for all intents and purposes, but it would be weird if they didn't talk, so we end up with a walking, talking MacGuffin, who's usually kind of whiny. It's far better to have these sorts of characters participate in the story in some way. They should be written as characters with goals and motivations and backstory and everything else that goes into a good character. This gets back to the whole agency thing as well. MacGuffinified characters fundamentally lack agency, and it usually comes across as making them unlikable. And the last unlikable producing thing that we'll talk about today, the character not fitting the tone of the story. I noticed something as I was thinking about going through this stuff for this video, and that's that there's this weird thing where the setting that a character finds themselves in and the plot that they participate in will sort of modulate their likability. If you take a character from something like a grimdark story and put them into like a cozy mystery, that character will probably seem really, really out of place and really unlikable. Your brooding, violent, cynical character might not be unlikable provided you stick them in the right setting. I make too many videos to remember if I actually made one on this topic or not, but I think I once made a video that talks about contrast in writing, that a character is only strong or evil in the context of the strength and evilness of other characters that you've displayed in the story. So a reader will think a character is strong based on how strong they are relative to the other characters that you've displayed in the story. A reader will think that a character is evil in relation to the evilness of the other characters that you've presented in the story. Everything is based on the contrast between that element or that character and the other elements or other characters that you've presented in the story. So a murderous, backstabbing, vengeful liar of a character might be unlikable unless they are contrasted with other characters who are more murderous and worse liars than they are. In this way, it could be said that the likability of a character can be determined as much through comparison with other characters in the story as through objective measurement. If you add more characters who are unlikable in comparison to another character, then that character will potentially rise in likability in comparison. This means that if you have a character who seems unlikable, you can change things about that character to make them more likable, or you can change other things about the story to make them fit better within it. This gets back into a lot of other things that we really don't have time to talk about today, like character backstories, which sometimes if you have a particular backstory for a character, it can justify some of their behaviors that might otherwise make them seem unlikable. When you give the reader the proper context around a character, you can take a character who might seem unlikable and actually make them a little bit more likable in the eyes of the reader. I guess the main takeaway from this is that a character is not just shaped by who that character is, but the world that they are set against, and that's something you need to consider when it comes to the likability of your characters. Speaking of things I need to consider, I really need to consider ending this video because it's getting quite long, so that's what I'm going to do right now. So there you have it. I hope you found this video likable. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.